honest with you. I don't really know anything about death. Now, this may sound shocking or surprising to some of you because I've spent this entire year trying to understand it. But what happened was, the more I researched, the more books I read, the more people I talked to, I only felt more at odds with the one certain thing that faces us all. What I didn't realize until this year is that I've been governed by a subconscious fear of death for most of my life. And truthfully, most individuals in Western society are, and it takes the driver's seat during many of our most life-defining moments. In Western culture, fear is camouflaged in the more acceptable appearance of stress. And I know this trick incredibly well, as I have lived inside of this illusion for most of my life, wearing my stress as a badge of success because it meant that I was constantly striving for this goal of perfection that I believed would bring me happiness, but actually is unattainable. I couldn't even imagining living my life in another way because I hadn't experienced any other way of living it, and it didn't seem possible to me. But we have forgotten that there is another way to look at life, a way to acknowledge our fear of death by reintegrating it into conversation and taking charge of it in the face of the modern medical industry. Having faced a great deal of my fear, let me explain how it happened. My journey began with a conversation, as many do. It was with a woman named Marilyn Rush, who is both a midwife and a death midwife, or death doula, someone who helps bring life into the world, as well as giving psychological and emotional, spiritual, any kind of funeral planning support for families of the dying. Since I had no idea of where to start my research, I decided that I would call her. And she's also coincidentally my mother's midwife, and who knew that almost 19 years after my birth, we'd both be interested in the same field. So we set up a Skype, and after our 2-hour conversation and writing down 6 pages of notes, it had become blatantly clear to me that because death has become such a taboo in our society, it is the first and most integral part of reintegrating death into Western culture is starting a conversation about it. The socio-emotional selectivity theory, developed by Laura Carstensen, does an incredibly good job of explaining why this is the case. The theory states that depending on how much time we perceive ourselves to have left, we will either shift our focus to things that might gratify us in the future, or things that actually fulfill and nourish us in the present moment. This is why younger adults tend to focus on things like self-actualization, creativity, and things that have a future-centric motivation. On the other hand, elderly people or the terminally ill tend to focus on the things in the here and now, to their relationships with their family and the people closest to them. So what I wanted to know was whether by reintroducing ourselves to our mortality through conversation, I could create a cognitive shift in people's minds that would allow them to make decisions that make them both happy in the present as well as the future. I set out to create a format for this to happen here in Bali. And after researching online, reading many books, and talking to many people, I found something called the Death Cafe. Now, the Death Cafe was originally founded as a social franchise by a man named John Underwood in 2010 because he believed that, I quote, people had lost control of one of the most significant events that we have to face. The Death Cafe the session happens a lot like it sounds like. People are sitting in one big circle in a cafe-like setting, or dotted around at many different tables if there's more than 20 participants. You eat cake, drink tea and coffee, and talk about mortality. The conversation isn't meant to give you any answers about death and dying, but rather to facilitate an open, honest conversation about a topic that has been so denied in our society. The sole mission statement of the Death Cafe is to increase awareness of death to help people make the most of their finite lives. Now, the Death Cafe is formatted in a pop-up style format, meaning that it can be facilitated by anyone for anyone, meaning that I could start one here. Since the Deaf Cafe aligned completely with my Envision project, I became affiliated with them online and set about organizing my first Deaf Cafe here at our very own co-working space, The Bridge. Now, that was in February, and I have hosted 3 more events since at different places all over the island. My last one was here as a student Deaf Cafe, and it was amazing to see how engaged students were in this topic that isn't often spoken about, and it gave me even more passion to complete this project that I had begun. At the end of every Deaf Cafe, I had created a reflection form so that not only I, but the participants could see how they responded from the beginning versus the end. I'm going to show you a slide with a word cloud on it, and basically what it is the words that were most used to describe the Deaf Cafe on the reflection form. And the bigger the word, the more times it was said. Though these conversations are the seeds of change, they're only the first step to reintegrating deaf into our society. Because we are seeing now more than ever, thanks to our over-medicalized end-of-life care, that it is not only vital to talk about our deaths, but to reclaim and protect them from the death industry that has resulted due to decades upon decades of fearfulness towards this subject. Though we seek to control almost every single aspect of our lives, many of us actually willingly abandon that control when it comes to stating our wishes for our deaths. Seems kind of twisted, I think. And so a national study done by the Conversation Project in 2018 in the US stated that 92% of Americans think it's important to discuss their end-of-life care wishes with their friends and their family, but only 32% of those people actually ended up doing that. During my research, I encountered a book called The Better End by Dan Morhaime. This novel uses messages of hope, empowerment, and inspiration to educate his readers about one thing that could drastically change those statistics that I just told you about. That one thing is the Advanced Care Directive. Now, once this Advanced Care Directive is understood, navigating end-of-life care wishes becomes much less of a kerfuffle. So, what is an Advanced Care Directive? An ACD, or a living will, is a legal document that specifies what decisions are to be taken if you become incapacitated and can no longer do so for yourself. It specifies things like life-sustaining treatment wishes, like ventilators and feeding tubes. It also asks you about whether you'd like to be an organ donor and who you would like to designate as your healthcare proxy, which is someone who you designate to speak for you if you can no longer do so for yourself. And Dan Morhaime makes it incredibly clear what happens when people don't fill out these advanced care directives. We've seen the people that get something called care, which is really closer to torture. And there comes a time when enough is enough, when we cross that line between meaningful medical care and the humility to let nature take its course. And that really stuck with me, because the doctor's one goal is to sustain life, but there actually comes a point when that's no longer what's at the best interest of the patient. So for example, if you were in a car crash and you were unconscious and you were brought into the hospital, if you had an advanced care directive outlining your wishes, your patient choice would be honored even if you weren't conscious in that moment. So this may all sound really complex and complicated to complete, because you need legal witnesses to watch you sign the document and many other things that I don't even understand. But I have really good news for you. It doesn't have to start at such a complicated level. With the help of something called the Conversation Project, the people that did the survey I mentioned earlier, we can actually create a precursory document that will help us fill out the advanced care directive later on if so wished. Conversation Project is an online platform that was launched in the past decade, and it gives you helpful questions and ways to communicate wishes for your death with your family. After navigating their website and filling out one of their basic forms, I've decided on some things that I would like for my death. Firstly, I don't want to be sedated by any pain medication. I want to be able to communicate with the people around me. I want to be at home or a place like it, surrounded by family and the people that matter to me the most. I don't want treatment for a terminal illness to go on if it is no longer increasing the quality of my life, even if it might give me more time. And lastly, when I do die, I want to biodegrade in a mushroom suit. Now, I thought it was ridiculous how long it took me to figure out those 4 sentences. And there are things that I haven't decided on yet, but that's okay. It's not the end point that is so important. It's the journey all the way up until that point. At the beginning of this year, I had one simple goal: to change a single person's life with my project. I thought that would happen today. I thought someone was going to walk out of this building going, "Oh, this is the meaning of death. No, wait, maybe this is the meaning of life," or something along those lines. But I realized about 3 months ago that I had completed my goal an incredibly long time ago, because I have changed over the course of this year. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my life used to be governed by invisible stress. My life was a maze of endless deadlines. It felt like one endless to-do list. And when I checked off one thing, there was always another, and another, and another, and another. And so it left me wondering what the point of life was if I couldn't be present enough to actually enjoy it. So thanks to the tools that I've shared with you today, I've been able to move away from this stress-centric life to one where I'm empowered and passionate about my future, and one where I'm able to balance my mental and physical health at the same time and not live in this thick stress. By unpacking my death, I've realized something about life. The point isn't only to die well. It is to live a good life all the way up until that point. Now, I know that I won't have forever to live. I might not even have months, or weeks, or days. I could die now, or now. But with death as a constant companion, I've been forced into the present moment like never before. I find myself seeking out more meaningful conversations and things that actually fulfill and nourish me in the present moment, rather than waiting for things that might gratify me in the future. Now, all of these things are really important, but the thing that I want you guys to walk away with is that it is up to every single one of us to determine our life's happiness by stating our end-of-life care wishes and using death to anchor us in the present moment. Thank you.